Yeah, so we just filmed another video for about 30 minutes,
Yep.
and the mic was off.
Good
So,
old round two.
dilly dilly, take two.
Take two. So, once again, I am Jason Jornay,
And I'm Matthew Bradford.
and we are talking today about Sanford Meisner.
Sanford Meisner.
So, I'm going to start this off. If you guys don't know who Meisner is, he was actor turned acting theorist, and he was also educator, creator, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
To give some context on Meisner, he was born August 31st, 1905 in Brooklyn. He graduated from the now Juilliard School of Music in 1923.
He actually played piano first. Like, he got Juilliard piano.
Yeah, before being an actor, he's playing piano. Very versatile man. He was a former student of Lee Strasberg method, which is
he's the big
Jason
pupil of
about this one.
So he's the big pupil of Stanislavski, and he was really the one who made method American. He's the one who really brought that style to America.
Right. And he brought this American style into the group theater in 1931, and then he worked with other notables. Okay. So Meisner did a lot of things relevant to acting. He joined the first really big thing he did, other than the group theater, of course, was he joined the neighborhood playhouse, where he was able to bring in more of his American approach. He acted and directed in a lot of productions there until about 1958. At that point, he moved to L.A. In California to work as a film actor. He also directed for the new talent division of 20th Century Fox. This is probably what got him into, the wanting to teach his method and stuff. Yeah. Then he and James Carville actually created the Meisner-Carville School of Acting, and this was later extended into Hollywood. So it's a really big deal. Then the Sanford Meisner Center was born out of this school in 1995. This is the last thing Meisner kind of put his name on, and it was an educational acting center devoted to very professional acting training, where like big time actors could come and really refine their skills.
Definitely, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but he started to come around right at that change of Hollywood, and some of his notable students you might recognize: Gregory Peck, Jeff Goldblum, Amy Schumer, Stephen Colbert, Steve McQueen. Oh yeah, Tom Cruise. Actually, some of the people who, even Sandra Bullock, very diverse group of people, but he really came around at the beginning of that Hollywood era. So his biggest mark he left on acting is something called the repetition game, or the repetition exercise. So actually, it's a lot like that me-you exercise we did in Acting 1. Some of the me-you. And it has three big stages. The first stage is called objective repetition. So what this stage encompasses is just one phrase. And if you're in a show, it can be like a specific line, or it can just be an arbitrary phrase. For example, how are you today? And Matt, so like Matt responded, the goal of this is to just emotionally connect with the person, just have it happen naturally. So, how are you today?
How are you today?
How are you today?
How are you today?
And we're supposed to give back and forth between each other without changing that phrase. So even though it's just one phrase, it's really about that emotional connection and just responding to that. Yeah. Then we get to the second step. So once you start understanding how each other works, it's the same thing, objective repetition, but with changes. Right. So you don't change a lot. We'd still be using that phrase like, you like baseball?
You like baseball?
And when we get to that point where we feel that emotional peak, I feel inspired, or there's just nowhere else to go with this, you change the phrase. I hate baseball. And then that becomes a new phrase.
I hate baseball.
I hate baseball.
I hate baseball.
And you see how we can keep going with that and changing that. So you still have that continual flow of emotions, but you change it when you feel inspired. It's really important there. You don't think now's a good time.
Right.
You feel it and it just happens naturally. And then you get to the third step, which is like peak creativity.
Yep.
So this is called subjective repetition with changes. It's a big word for something very simple.
Right.
It's essentially an improvisational scene. So at this point, every line is different. It's improv, but the goal is focusing on the emotion.
Yeah,
So
we're
instead of
not talking.
focusing on the plot, like most improv, we've been talking like, why is there a cow there? Oh, look, it's a cow. And focusing on that cow, you'd be focusing on the emotional situation surrounding it. Like, there's a cow over there.
Why is there a cow over there?
Dude, I don't know what to do.
You should know what to do.
I'm really afraid of cows.
Oh, you're afraid of cows.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta go get this cow.
So you see how we're focusing. It's about a cow, but it's really about that emotional arc. I am afraid of cows. He's like, I have to deal with this guy. And even though the cow is a subject, it's not what the scene's about.
Meisner encouraged people to really tap into the emotional qualities of a character and furthermore blend that within who you are to really bring yourself, not necessarily bringing all of Matt Bradford into a character, but bringing the fact that I'm a person and that I tap into emotions. Bringing that into a character can really expand that character's horizons and how that character reaches out and connects with an audience.
He emphasizes being versus acting. So we talked in the beginning of your projective acting.
Yeah.
So one of the big things is you're like, I am pretending to paint. Right. I am painting instead of I'm just here and I'm painting. I exist in that moment and how that moment influences me. And I think, as Matt was talking about, having that point of your character, of you being you, it really helps diversify scenes. So we always talk about making bold choices, big decisions. That's hard to do when you were just like, I am pretending to paint. Because if your sole motivation is like, what do people do when they pretend to paint?
Or if I am just a painter. Like, if you think like that.
Definitely.
Like, what kind of bold decisions are you going to make?
And this kind of diversifies it from we were doing the Chekhov exercises in class, where you were like, I have to be this character. How does this character move? How does this character think? Versus like, okay, well, if this happened to me, how would I react? And you bring that personality through.
Yeah, and if we're talking about like how we as students use Meisner's acting, I think like going back to Chekhov and Stanislavski, I think there's like a nice mix you can make between.
What I was trying to think about is how do you think this influences people today? So like what makes it still relevant? Because he was around at the beginning of Hollywood. It's been almost 70 years now.
Yeah.
How do you think that like benefits people today? Like how can we use this?
Me personally, I think we're talking about Hollywood.
Yes.
And Meisner's techniques being relevant in Hollywood, and I think that really comes in with like because Meisner provides this emotional connection, I think it really connects to screen acting.
Definitely.
And he directed for 20th Century Fox for a long time, and that kind of, and like Jason said, he was around at the pivotal point of Hollywood.
Especially in the world today where you have to do several takes, or especially with the emergence of CGI, blue screen, green screen, or sets where it's not necessarily living in that moment, you have to still live under imaginary circumstances and live truthfully. Yeah. So when you're in acting now, A Beauty and the Beast was a good example, something that came out relatively recently, and it was almost all green screen, and the actor who played the Beast had this big mech suit on, and it was like, wow, they're such great actors. How do they do that? And the thing is, there's nothing to play off of. You can't get an audience reaction. There's no like set to interact with. So what really helps is to have that imaginary circumstance and live truthfully under that. Like this just is a beast. This is a castle, and it really comes across.
If you're looking at the movie Avatar with the blue people and Pandora, when you look at them, they're in this big world of it's this huge planet that like we really can't identify much with. Like we don't know what it's like to be a person going inside of Avatar's body and stuff like that. But however, they utilize Meisner's techniques and the actors, even though there's all this CGI going on and all this stuff, they tap in to emotional connection between each other and they portray they portray love between each other and different emotions between
Oh,
each
yeah.
other, and that's what really pulls people into watching the movie. Like,
Another good movie to talk about is Rocky. So if you've seen the first Rocky movie, I can't empathize with the fact of being like a 200-pound brutal fighter who's living on the streets of New York fighting for his life. But I still identify with the fact he's a real human. He's overcoming challenges in this outrageous scenario. And it kind of comes to a point later in the series, if you watch like Rocky 4, it's all about the Cold War and this is brilliant plot. But I don't identify with that anymore because you lost that human connection. I don't identify with the person that I'm with.
right. Going back to movies and everything, that's what distinguishes good from great movies
Definitely.
and good actors from great actors, because when they tap in with those emotional qualities, that'll get the audience to actually keep watching the movie, because there's a lot of distractions that go on with screen acting that an audience can face. They can look at their phones, they can go on their computers, they can be eating food, all this stuff. So they're not forced to watch. But those movies that suck the audience in, it's really like it's because they're identifying with the characters and the relationships that are being built because of Meisner's techniques.
And I think it's important to talk about something that we as theater people don't always realize is the importance of takes and cuts in movies. So you could do one scene like 60 times.
Yeah.
And to have that freshness, to live in that moment, even though you've done it time and time again, it shouldn't be thinking like, well, should I do it this way? Should I do it this way? It's being invested in that moment because that's where spontaneity envisions itself. And also in auditions.
Yeah.
So when you're in a casting room with something you may have gotten like 2 minutes ago, and it's someone you've never met before, you're reading a script with them, you can't just say, well, I made an intellectual choice to do this, and I read it through my script, and I spent hours on this. You can't do that.
Yeah. Like when you're in a scene or an audition, like, and you're making these bold choices, you're not in the moment. You're not thinking, would my character do this?
Yeah.
You're just responding because
Definitely.
you identify with human emotion.
Yeah.
You identify with how a person or a character would react.
And the thing is, some of these you have to think about. There's a lot of violence in theater, like stage combat. Like you get backhanded across the face, you would think like, I can't imagine what it would feel like to be backhanded. How would that feel? Instead of like thinking, I just got hit.
Yeah.
He's saying the I, and this is what happened to me. Instead of like, how would this happen?
Mm-hmm.
You just let it happen. Like, okay, I'm responding to that because this is real, which kind of confuses with the method. He came from the Strasbourg school, but you're not embodying just the character. You're putting yourself into that moment and makes it more relatable, something only you can do. Because anybody can do something generic. Because when you can get lost in that sometimes, you're like, all right, well, I'm a bad guy. What's a bad guy look like? Bad guy does this. And you get lost in that human aspect.
Yeah, you're not standing out at that point, because that's what Meisner, through his school, he's had a lot of notable people come out, and the reason they're notable is because they're individuals. Like they're very unique.
Nobody
as
on that
actors.
list was the same.
Yeah, like Jason was saying, like if you go to embody like this type of character, you're not going to stand out, and people probably aren't going to connect with you as much. But if you make bold choices because of who you are and what you're bringing to a character, then you will be 10 times more unique and you'll stick out, and then that'll lead you to like a more professional, more successful career.
Definitely. And I think this is a good point to bring that big question. Would you use this, and how do you use this in your acting life?
I thought, like, we've been talking back and forth like a lot of the day about this, and Meisner's technique is very good, like, I think in the midst of like a rehearsal, in the midst of a scene, because it's very quick. We've been talking about emotional connectedness and using it to the advantage of a character, and not locking yourself into a character's restraints, putting yourself as a person into a character. So during a rehearsal, and just refining your acting skills in general, I think Meisner's techniques are very important because they lead to bold choices, how we've been talking about.
So I personally, I like when I was saying about using it in rehearsal because none of these are perfect. But I like to use Meisner's approach because I feel like it gives me a more complete sense of who I am. And the thing is, you don't need to do the repetition game every time you want to use Meister acting. You don't have to like, all right, well, how am I living truthfully? If you're in a scene and you think, crap, I'm getting distanced from this. What is the emotion in this room right now? That's Meisner acting. And I think it's important sometimes to recognize the fact you don't have to go through every single step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
It can help. But I personally, I like the fact that because you put that little bit of yourself in there, you don't have to be like, crap, I just don't feel my character today. I just can't become the Joker. This is hard. And I don't have to be in it 24/7. And you see the danger of that, being in that character 24/7 to keep that realistic. You can revert back to yourself like, okay, well, I'm me. And this is how I feel about the situation. And you're back in that character. And I think that's really, really useful tool.
Yeah. And yeah, I like that point. I think Meisner acting brings that quality of simplicity, especially when you merge it with some other styles. Because if we're looking at back to Chekhov, I think Chekhov's style could get very, very tedious and stressful, and like meaning that there's so much to think about. I have to apply action to every word.
Yeah, and it can take time.
And a lot of time, and that's important. Like
Definitely.
I've myself, being in acting 101, have seen like a lot of results by applying, like by scoring my script and by applying action words to each of my lines. However, I think incorporating Meisner's simplicity and kind of spontaneity, along with Chekhov and Stanislavski's techniques, breeds a mixture that makes you a strong contender.
Sometimes with the Meisner exercises, you can't accurately portray a character, because sometimes if you're trying to be imposing and you're just not an imposing guy, like I'm skinny, I'm relatively average height, but I'm trying to portray someone powerful, Chekhov really helps with embodying that huge character, becoming that person, even though you're not transforming yourself physically.
Mm-hmm.
So Meisner sometimes can draw back on some of those parts. So it can't be right for every situation. But I think as an actor, the most important thing to remember, just emotional flow within the scene, put a little bit of yourself in it, and just listen and respond naturally. Because if you have that, you really have the complete character. You don't have to go through all the exercises. It's a good way to check back on yourself. Like, okay, is this how someone would really react?
Yeah.
Am I understanding what this scene is? Like, do I feel connected?
Because that's what people want. They want to see people react. They want to see characters, whoever they are, react to like people. Because when people see that, it starts to dive into what theater's all about. The human condition. Looking at how people would react under certain circumstances, which is what Stanislavski says.
And I think it's where some of the brilliance comes in, because you get these larger than life, because you never want to see a movie about something normal. There's always something special, extraordinary that wouldn't normally happen, otherwise you wouldn't watch it, right? Even the biographical movies are beyond normal.
They're about big things people have done.
Yeah, like Star Wars. Star Wars is never going to happen. It's crazy. It's out of this world. But you get that human connection. So you get to see something spectacular but relatable. And I think that's where Meisner really comes in.